Get a job and stop being a leech, my daughter-in-law shouted across the table. For a split second, forks froze midair. Darren stared at his plate. And me? I laughed. Not the nervous laugh of someone humiliated. A deep, knowing laugh that made Talia's perfectly painted lips tighten. Because what she didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I was worth $5 million. The dining room smelled of burnt cheese and oversalted tomato sauce. Their famous lasagna steamed in front of me, served on a chipped plate with a bent fork. Darren and Talia's places gleamed with matching china, wine glasses catching the glow of the chandelier. Mine looked like it had been pulled from the back of a thrift store shelf. I sat at the far end of the table, the seat reserved for those who didn't matter. My son avoided my eyes. Thalia smirked, leaning back in her designer dress, every inch of her body language screaming triumph. Walmart's always hiring greeters, she added, her tone syrupy, her eyes sharp. Something to give you independence, self-respect. Self-respect. I swallowed the bitterness that word carried. After 3 years of thrift store cardigans and second-hand furniture, 3 years of watching this woman strut through a life I had built, I had learned silence was the sharpest weapon. But tonight, silence was no longer enough. I set down my fork carefully, the metal ringing faint against porcelain. My hands folded in my lap, steady, deliberate. When I looked up, I made sure my eyes found hers and held them. "Thalia," I said softly, and the room seemed to shrink. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Her painted nails tapped against the stem of her glass. Darren shifted in his chair. For the first time, I watched the confidence slip from her face. I pushed back from the table, rising slowly. "Thank you for dinner," I said, voice calm, even polite. The lasagna was exactly what I expected. Thalia's lips parted, caught between outrage and confusion. Darren opened his mouth, but no words came out. At the doorway, I paused, hand resting on the knob. "Oh, and about that job advice?" She blinked. "What about it?" My smile carried no warmth. "You might want to start updating your own resume." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. I closed the door behind me, the October chill wrapping around my shoulders like an old friend. 3 days later, my son called. 3 days later, my phone rang. "Mom?" Darren's voice was cautious, hesitant, the way you speak when you're not sure how the other person will respond. "Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like to come over?" There was a long pause on the line. In 3 years, my son had never once stepped foot inside my apartment. He had helped me move in, half-heartedly, but declined coffee invitations, always with an excuse that carried Thalia's fingerprints. Now, confronted with the idea of seeing the life I supposedly lived, he sounded almost afraid. "Yes, okay, I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and sat back in my chair. My heart was steady, not racing. It had taken 3 years of humiliation, 3 years of mismatched plates and forced smiles, for this moment to arrive. As I set the kettle to boil, my mind drifted back to the Tuesday morning phone call that had set the dinner in motion. Darren's voice, strained even then, as though someone was whispering directives just out of earshot. "Mom, would you like to come over for dinner Friday night? Talia's making her famous lasagna." Famous. The word nearly made me laugh out loud. I'd seen that woman burn water. But I bit my tongue and said what I always said. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. What time?" 7:30. A pause, then quieter. "And Mom, maybe dress a little nicer this time. You know how Talia likes things to look presentable." Presentable. I remembered staring into the hallway mirror after that call. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, face bare, cardigan faded at the elbows. I had worn the same uniform for 3 years, the grieving widow, the dependent mother. The disguise I needed for them to reveal who they truly were when they thought I had nothing. Friday night had arrived cold and sharp, October's breath cutting straight through me as I walked 6 blocks to the house. The same house I had purchased for them as a wedding gift, though they never knew it. Darren opened the door with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. His hug was quick, obligatory. My son, 34, still handsome, but hollowed out in ways that had Talia's fingerprints all over him. And then she appeared, platinum blonde, a dress worth more than most people's rent. Aggressive beauty that demanded respect she hadn't earned. She looked me over like I was a stray that had wandered into her spotless home. "Hello, Talia. Thank you for having me." Her smile was thin, slicing. "Of course, family dinner and all that." The dining room was dressed for performance. Polished silver, gleaming plates. Except mine. My place setting was older, mismatched, a bent tine on the fork. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd written it in neon. "You don't belong here. Mom, sit here," Darren said, gesturing to the chair at the farthest end. The seat of distance, the seat of exile. I sat, folded my hands in my lap, waited. Thalia served with exaggerated flourishes. "It's an old family recipe, my grandmother's." Her eyes dared me to criticize. I chewed carefully, the pasta overcooked, the sauce salty enough to dry my mouth. "It's delicious," I said anyway. For 20 minutes, conversation limped along. Darren spoke about work, avoiding mention of the promotion he hadn't received. Talia filled every pause, bragging about yoga, shopping, redecorating plans. "We're thinking of new furniture," she said, slicing lasagna into neat squares. "More modern. This stuff is so outdated." I remembered helping them choose that very furniture, back when gratitude still colored her voice. "That sounds expensive," I murmured. Her eyes gleamed. "Well, some people understand you have to invest in quality." The barb landed exactly where she wanted it. Not beautiful, not quality, not worth investing in. Then came the moment she had been building toward. "Eileen," she began, voice dipped in faux concern. "We've been worried about you. Living alone, struggling. It's been 3 years since Harold passed." "I'm managing fine," I said quietly. "Are you, though?" Patronizing sweet poison dripping from every syllable. "You shop at thrift stores. No car. Barely getting by." Every choice deliberate. The apartment bought in cash, the cardigans a costume, the walks by preference. They had mistaken restraint for poverty. "Getting by isn't living, Mom," Darren added softly. For just a moment, I heard the boy I had raised, but then Talia's hand closed around his, and his voice faltered. "We can't keep helping you," she continued. "We want to start a family. You're only 64. Lots of people your age work. Walmart is always hiring greeters. A Walmart greeter." After building an empire with Harold, after gifting them the very house we sat in, she wanted me to stand at a doorway and say hello for minimum wage. "Something to give you purpose," she added brightly. "Self-respect." Self-respect. The irony was so thick I could taste it. That was when I let her see it. The glint she hadn't seen in 3 years. My warning, sharp as a knife. "You have no idea what's coming for you." And I had left them in silence. Now, Darren was coming to my apartment, the 1-bedroom stage set I had crafted to perfection. When he arrived, his eyes darted around with poorly concealed pity. Yard sale furniture, thrift store curtains, chipped mug on the counter. "Mom, this place is small," I suggested. I was going to say depressing. I poured coffee into one of my hidden good cups. The rich aroma filled the air. He sipped, startled. "This is really good." I splurge occasionally. We sat across the tiny kitchen table, sunlight filtering through cheap curtains. The silence between us was heavier than the lasagna had been. "About Friday night," he began. "Talia's really upset. She thinks you threatened her." "What do you think?" I asked, steady. He shifted, uneasy. "I think something's going on with you. You've been different, distant. And then Friday, the way you looked at her." "The things I said were true." He frowned. "What does that mean, Mom?" "You told her she has no idea what's coming. That sounds like a threat." I leaned forward, voice calm, even. "Darren, do you remember what your father used to say about people who mistake kindness for weakness?" He nodded slowly. "He said they learned the difference eventually." "Exactly." I let him sit with that. let him wrestle with the truth he had ignored for 3 years. Then I asked the question that landed harder than any revelation. When was the last time Talia asked me how I was doing? Not bills, not rent. Me, as a person. He opened his mouth, closed it. When was the last time she asked about my friends, my interests? When was the last time she treated me as family, not a burden? His shoulders sagged under the weight of silence. I stood, walked to the living room shelf. Behind paperback novels, tucked like contraband, sat a manila folder. Its edges worn from years of waiting. I carried it back to the table, placed it gently in front of him. The paper whispered as I slid it across the wood. "Darren," I said, my voice steady, the October light catching on the folder's crease. "This is who I really am." Darren's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Pages slid across the small kitchen table. Bank statements with balances higher than anything he'd ever imagined. Property deeds stamped with my name. Investment portfolios that sprawled across states. 5 million? He whispered, eyes wide, voice hollow. I watched him take in every number, every seal. His face shifted through confusion, disbelief, then something dangerously close to betrayal. "Mom, you live like this?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. I live in choices. Every single thing I've done for 3 years has been deliberate. I needed to know who loved me when they thought I had nothing." He looked at me as though I'd just confessed to sorcery. "You've been testing us?" I folded my hands, steady, calm. "Testing myself, protecting myself. Harold and I built everything you see on those pages. And when he died, I had to know the difference between sympathy and sincerity." He ran a hand through his hair, the way he had as a boy when he couldn't solve a puzzle. "But all this time, you let us believe—" "I let Talia show me exactly who she was," I corrected. "Every cutting comment, every mismatched plate, every time she suggested Walmart as my destiny. She believed I had no value. She never once asked me how I was, Darren. Not once." He flinched at the truth pressed against him. "When was the last time," I asked softly, leaning forward, "that you defended me? When was the last time you called just to hear my voice, without her in the background? When did you last look at me and see your mother instead of an inconvenience?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. Silence pressed down on him harder than my words. I sat back. "Think on it. I'll give you time. A week. For both of you to decide whether you want to rebuild or burn bridges completely." I left him there at the kitchen table, staring at the manila folder like it contained not numbers, but a mirror. 7 days. That was all I gave them. On the 8th, the phone rang. Thalia's voice sliced through the morning air. "Eileen, we need to talk. Tonight, 7, at the house." I sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter strength. "Do we?" "Yes. Don't play games with me. Darren told me everything. About the money. About your little performance." Her fury crackled down the line, brittle, desperate. 7 o'clock, she snapped, then hung up. I set down my cup, walked to the closet. For 3 years, thrift store cardigans had hung like camouflage. Tonight, the mask would fall. I pushed the hangers aside until my fingers touched fabric that whispered of another life. Black silk, elegant and sharp. I slid the dress from its garment bag, its weight rich in my hands. Jewelry box next. Real pearls, real gold. Shoes with heels that clicked with authority. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back wasn't a grieving widow in faded wool. She was Eileen Holloway, the woman who had built an empire with Harold, who had signed contracts worth millions, who had never needed permission to walk into a room. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. At 7 sharp, I stood on the porch of the house I had purchased, the house whose mortgage I had quietly paid. Darren opened the door. His eyes widened. "Mom, you look different." His voice dropped, reverent. "Like yourself, like you used to." Behind him, Thalia appeared, wrapped in a designer dress that screamed price tag more than style. But next to me, next to Truth, she looked like a child playing dress-up. Well, well, she said, lips curled. The poor widow has quite the wardrobe tucked away. Among other things, I replied smoothly. We moved to the living room. I chose the sofa deliberately, the one I'd helped them pick years ago when gratitude still softened her edges. The room glowed under warm light, every piece of furniture carrying the echo of my generosity. Thalia positioned herself like a prosecutor ready for closing arguments. Let's hear it, the whole truth. How much money do you really have? Why lie? What kind of person pretends to be poor for 3 years? I folded my hands in my lap, pearls cool against my throat. The kind of person who wants to know who her real friends are. Her laugh was brittle, echoing off the walls. Friends? I'm your daughter-in-law, not your friend. Family doesn't lie to family. I tilted my head. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you told neighbors I was losing my mind. Why you hinted to the mailman that I belonged in a facility. Her face drained of color. Darren turned sharply toward her. Thalia? She stammered. I was concerned. She dresses like a bag lady. She acts strange. I thought, or, I cut in softly, you were laying the groundwork, building a case that I was incompetent. Convenient, isn't it? Especially if there's money to be accessed. Her mouth opened, shut. I reached into my purse. A thick envelope rested against my palm, heavier than it looked. I set it on the table between us with deliberate care. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Fear crackled beneath her fury. You want to know everything? I asked quietly. The silk of my dress brushed against my leg as I leaned forward, pearls catching the light. Because everything is right here. The envelope sat between us, the silence vibrating. Let's talk, I said, my voice a blade wrapped in velvet. About the attorney you contacted. Thalia's eyes darted to the envelope, but her chin lifted, false confidence coating her words. I don't know what you're talking about. I slid the first sheet free. 3 months ago, you contacted an elder law attorney. You inquired about the process for guardianship over an elderly relative who might be showing signs of mental decline. You asked specifically whether guardianship would give you access to assets. You asked if those assets could be liquidated for the patient's own good. Her face blanched. That's insane, she whispered. Insane, I echoed, laying down another document. These are the attorney's notes. Your name, your questions, your signature. Darren looked at his wife, horror dawning. Thalia, is this true? She sputtered, voice cracking. I was concerned. She's been acting strange, dressing shabby, saying odd things. I thought she might be losing it. I reached for the next set of papers. Or perhaps you were simply preparing to take what wasn't yours. Here are the credit card statements you never showed Darren. $43,000 of debt, hidden, jewelry pawned and replaced with fakes. Darren's face collapsed in on itself. What? I pushed a photo across the table. One of her diamond earrings. The real pair sold long ago, the fakes glinting under store lights. His voice broke. How much of my life with you has been a lie? Thalia stood abruptly, swaying in her heels. You set me up, you vindictive. I rose too, smoothing my dress. I simply stopped protecting you from consequences. Then I reached into the envelope one last time. This document was heavier, thicker paper, my name printed in bold across the top. I unfolded it carefully, laid it flat. The deed. This house, I said, voice quiet but merciless, belongs to me. It always has. You've lived here as my guests for 7 years. Silence thundered. Darren stared at the paper like it was written in another language. Mom! His voice cracked. It means, I said evenly, your wife has 30 minutes to pack a bag and leave. After that, I'll call the police and report her for trespassing. Thalia whirled on Darren, desperation cracking her mask. Say something! This is our home! But my son was still staring at the deed, reality crashing in. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. Get out! The words landed like a hammer. Thalia gasped, as if struck. What? Get out of my mother's house! Her face crumpled, but I felt no triumph, only weary relief. She bolted upstairs, sobbing, slamming drawers. I heard her throwing clothes, her rage ricocheting off the walls. This isn't over. She spat on her way down, dragging a suitcase. Her eyes burned holes through me. You think you've won, but this isn't over.
Oh, but it is, I said softly. For you, this is the beginning of the end.
That night, the phone began to ring. First Margaret, Harold's sister-in-law, outrage in her voice. Eileen, what in God's name have you done? Thalia says you lied about money, pretended to be poor, then threw her out of her home. I sat at my kitchen table, pen poised over a notepad. Calm, collected. Did she mention the attorney she consulted to have me declared incompetent? Silence. She said you've lost your mind. Margaret snapped finally. Harold would be ashamed. Ask her about the $43,000 of secret debt, I replied, then hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Patricia, then David, one after another, voices dripping with accusation. Dementia, vindictive behavior. Kicked a young woman onto the street. I wrote each name down neatly. Let them reveal themselves. Let them show how quickly they turned when presented with a sob story. By midnight, my notepad was full. My head, however, was clear. 2 days later, Darren slumped into a cafe booth, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. She's poisoning everyone, he said, rubbing his temples. She's telling people you're unstable, that you threatened her. She even called my boss. My stomach dropped. What did she say? She told him you have dementia, that I've been distracted at work, worried about you. She implied my performance was slipping. The cruelty took my breath away. And what did he say? He was sympathetic, suggested I look into family medical leave, as if I have a sick parent. Darren laughed bitterly, then buried his face in his hands. She's always one step ahead. I reached across the table, squeezed his hand. She's not ahead. She's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes.
But in the quiet of that night, I admitted to myself, she had cut deeper than I expected.
The final blow came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing investment portfolios when the phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Holloway? A woman's voice, crisp, official. Yes. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Sacramento Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about a report that's been filed against you. The pen slipped from my hand. I'm sorry, what? A young woman named Thalia Holloway has alleged that you are the victim of elder abuse and financial exploitation. According to her, your son and others are stealing from you, controlling your finances, and forcing you to live in substandard conditions. The words slammed into me like a fist. Through the receiver, I could hear papers shuffling. She's provided photographs of your apartment, bank statements. She claims she's been trying to protect you. I closed my eyes. My small apartment, the costume I had lived in for 3 years, turned into ammunition in her hands. Detective, I managed, keeping my voice even. Yes, ma'am? Can you repeat the nature of the allegations? Elder abuse and financial exploitation. I swallowed, forced air into my lungs. I see. Her tone softened slightly. Mrs. Holloway, we'd like you to come down to the station to give your side of the story. The room tilted around me. The folder, the deeds, the carefully constructed disguise. Suddenly, all of it threatened to turn against me. Of course, I said at last, each syllable steady even as the ground shifted beneath me. When? As soon as possible. I looked at the phone lying heavy in my hand, the October evening pressing against the windows, darkness settling like judgment. Yes, detective, I whispered. I'll be there within the hour. The police station smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Neon lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh glare. Jonathan Reeves walked beside me, his leather briefcase heavy with documents. He had represented my family for over 20 years, and tonight, he was more than an attorney. He was armor. Detective Sarah Martinez greeted us in a small interview room. She looked surprised when I entered in my black dress, pearls at my throat, Jonathan at my side. This wasn't the fragile widow from Thalia's stories. Mrs. Holloway, she began, consulting her notes. We've received photographs of your apartment and bank statements suggesting financial neglect. Ms. Holloway claims you're being exploited by your son. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were glossy photos of my modest apartment, taken through the windows, chipped mug, yard sale furniture, curtains faded by design. Then came photocopied statements from my daily expense account, the balance rarely higher than a few hundred. Jonathan leaned forward, voice calm. Detective, with respect, my client maintains multiple accounts. What you have here represents a single household account, not her full financial picture. He opened his briefcase with deliberate care and began laying out documents one by one. Bank statements with balances in the millions, investment portfolios, property deeds, real numbers, audited, impossible to fake. Detective Martinez's eyes widened. This shows assets of nearly $5 million. Yes, Jonathan said smoothly. My client has lived modestly by choice. She has never been financially controlled by her son. Quite the opposite. She has been supporting him for years. The detective flipped between the two sets of documents, the false and the real, the flimsy and the irrefutable. And there's more, Jonathan added. While Ms. Thalia Holloway claims to be protecting her mother-in-law, we have evidence that she was attempting to exploit her. I pulled another folder from my purse and slid it forward. Printed emails, consultation notes, phone records. Detective Martinez scanned the pages, her brow furrowing. There it was, in black and white. Thalia's inquiries about conservatorship laws, guardianship processes, searches on how to prove someone incompetent. Each one dated, each one logged. She specifically asked, Jonathan pointed out, whether gaining guardianship would grant access to bank accounts. She inquired about liquidating assets for the patient's own good. These are not the actions of a woman protecting her mother-in-law. The detective sat back, exhaling slowly. Her pen tapped against the table. So, what Ms. Holloway submitted was a false report. Yes, Jonathan said firmly, and a deliberate one, designed to mislead law enforcement. The detective's jaw tightened. That's a serious crime. I folded my hands in my lap, steady. So was trying to steal my life. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the buzz of neon. Then Detective Martinez closed the folder with finality. Now we arrest her. 2 hours later, Jonathan dropped me at a parking garage across town. My modest apartment was still a stage prop, but it no longer served me. Tonight, I returned home. The penthouse greeted me with glass walls that reflected the city's nightlights, leather chairs arranged beneath paintings Harold and I had collected over decades. This was the life I had built, the life I had chosen to protect in shadows. I poured a glass of wine, its ruby surface catching the glow of the skyline. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe as the woman I truly was. The phone rang. Darren. Mom. His voice was urgent. The police called me. They arrested Talia. I know, I said softly. A pause. Where are you? I went by your apartment, and it's empty. I smiled faintly at the irony. I'm at home. Home? What do you mean? The apartment was never home. It was a disguise. Come to Meridian Towers, penthouse level. You'll understand. 30 minutes later, Darren stood in my living room, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. This is where you've been living? All this time? Yes. I gestured around us, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the antique rug, the framed photographs of Harold and me. Even when I visited you in that little apartment, I came home to this. He sank into a leather chair, running his hands over the polished armrests like they might vanish if he blinked. I don't know what to say. Then don't, I answered gently. For a long time, he sat in silence, his face pale, his shoulders sagging. Finally, he looked up. She really tried to have you declared incompetent. Yes, and she filed a false police report. She would have dragged me down with her. Yes. His hands clenched. Why, Mom? Why go that far? I swirled my wine, watching the crimson ripple. Because she wasn't just greedy, she was malicious. When she realized she couldn't get what she wanted, she decided to destroy us out of spite. He stared into the city lights, voice breaking. I feel like my whole life has been a lie. I sat beside him. Not a lie, but protected. Your father and I pulled strings for you. Your job, your opportunities. We wanted you to thrive. But love doesn't mean turning a blind eye to abuse, even from family.
Tears welled in his eyes. I should have seen it. I should have defended you.
I touched his arm. You were blinded. Love can do that, or what you think is love.
He turned to me, desperate.
How do I know the difference? Between love and manipulation? How do I ever trust myself again?
I held his gaze. Love makes you feel like the best version of yourself. Manipulation makes you feel like you're never enough. Remember that.
He nodded slowly, breathing deep, as though taking the words into his bones.
Mom, he whispered, I'm sorry for all of it.
I know, sweetheart, and I forgive you. But from now on, no more tests, no more disguises, just truth. His lips trembled into something that might have been a smile. Deal. I raised my glass, the city glittering behind me. Deal.
The room was quiet, filled only with the hum of the city through the glass. For the first time in years, my son and I sat as mother and child, not adversaries separated by Thalia's shadow.
Then my phone rang again, slicing through the fragile peace. I answered, a crisp voice on the line. Mrs. Holloway, this is Detective Martinez. I thought you'd want to know. I held my breath. They arrested Thalia. 6 months later, I stood on my terrace, the city stretching out beneath me. The sunset painted the sky in amber and rose, the glass walls reflecting shades of fire. I cradled an empty wine glass, listening to the hum of traffic far below, and let myself exhale. The storm was over. Darren had called that morning with the words I'd been waiting for. The divorce is final, he said, voice lighter than it had been in years. Talia had been sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, restitution for the legal mess she had caused, and a restraining order that barred her from contacting either of us. For the first time in 3 years, I felt free. Not because she was gone, but because I was done hiding. The weeks that followed her sentencing brought something I never expected: apologies. Margaret, who had once spat Harold's name at me like an accusation, called with a trembling voice. Eileen, I'm ashamed. I believed her lies without even asking for your side. Can you forgive me? Patricia sent flowers with a note. I was wrong. Family should have trusted family. Even David, who had lectured me like a doctor diagnosing dementia, wrote an email admitting he'd been blinded by Thalia's performance. I responded to each one with grace. Apology accepted, but I hope you've learned what I already knew. Never judge before you've seen the whole picture. Some relationships would heal, others would remain cracked. That was life. One evening, Darren sat across from me at the terrace table, nervous energy rolling off him. There's someone I want you to meet, he said carefully. Her name is Rebecca. She's a teacher. We've been seeing each other for a few months. I raised an eyebrow. Does she know about the money? No, he admitted. She thinks I'm just a man with a modest job and a house I inherited from my grandmother. I laughed, shaking my head. Well, technically, that's not a lie. His smile was sheepish, but his eyes were hopeful. She's kind, Mom. Normal. She volunteers at an animal shelter. She drives a 10-year-old Honda and thinks Olive Garden is fine dining. I leaned forward. Tell me this. Does she make you feel like the best version of yourself, or like you're never enough? He hesitated only a second. Like the best version. Then trust that. Trust yourself. You're wiser now, Darren. You won't make the same mistake twice. He nodded, relief softening his shoulders. And when you're ready, I added, I'll meet her. No costumes, no tests, just me. His eyes shone, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy who once brought me wildflowers and called me the prettiest mommy in the world. With Thalia gone, I began to rebuild, not just my family, but myself. The house where Darren and Thalia had lived no longer held power over me. I sold it, placing the proceeds in an account for my son. A real inheritance this time, not the illusion of poverty I had used to test his loyalty. I made lists, places I wanted to see, causes I wanted to support, ways to live without fear. Philanthropy, travel, perhaps even love again someday. Or perhaps simply the peace of authenticity, of living as Eileen Holloway, no longer hidden behind thrift store cardigans. One evening, as the city's lights winked on, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Not the shabby woman I had pretended to be, but the woman I truly was. A businesswoman, a mother, a survivor. My shoulders were straight, my eyes clear, my heart lighter than it had been in years. That night, I whispered Harold's name into the twilight. He would have handled things differently, directly, maybe even bluntly, but he would have approved of the outcome. I had protected what we built. I had saved our son, and I had learned that kindness is not weakness, that boundaries are not cruelty, that justice, though sometimes delayed, will always find its way to the light. So here I am, glass empty, city glowing at my feet, ready for whatever comes next. No more disguises. No more apologies for who I am. I am Eileen Holloway, a woman who tested the people around her, paid the price, and came out stronger. A mother who fought for her son when he couldn't fight for himself. A widow who honors her husband's memory, not with silence, but with courage. I am done hiding. I am going to live it. And now, I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Share your advice, and tell me your city so I can see how far this story travels.